Hello and welcome to the Christian and Timbers AI Builders podcast. I'm your host, JC Christian, president at Christian and Timbers, and I'm joined today by Max Lamontel, the newest member of the team at Christian and Timbers, our managing partner of Aerospace and Defense as a practice as well. Max, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, no, thank you, JC. Appreciate the time. I'm looking forward to being able to share some thoughts and have the conversation with you today.
Awesome. Well, we've got a pretty jam-packed day of content, but we're going to cover things like hot AI jobs, AI layoffs, AI hiring that are both intersecting with aerospace and defense and also broader within software, cybersecurity, manufacturing at large. My first question for you today, Max, is
Mm.
just in general, what are some of the trends that you're seeing from very hot jobs in and around AI, perhaps that may or may not be intersecting with layoffs that are happening as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of noise, obviously, around AI jobs, AI layoffs, and companies obviously changing their hiring plans. The market is a bit more nuanced where than the headlines kind of make it sound. There are definitely areas where AI is creating new hiring demand. And in the search work and market conversations we're having, companies are still looking for people who can bring technology into the business in a practical way. And that could show up in means of data and automation, cybersecurity, digital transformation, anything that's AI enabled products or manufacturing technology. I think the real ask right now from the client's perspective is usually a bit more practical than the title suggests. They want leaders who can take that technology and effectively make it useful inside their businesses, ultimately. And at the same time, some categories of work are clearly being compressed, right? You see it in research heavy work, documentation, reporting, admin heavy processes. Companies are at a point where they're asking where can work be done faster, where tools can improve output, and where parts of that organization may need to be redesigned at the end of the day. And from our world, from the executive search perspective, it's interesting. The interesting part is how it's changing the mandates and changing those roles as that we're discussing. So a company may still be hiring a general manager, a strategy leader, a compliance leader, a technical executive, or even a commercial leader. But the expectations now around that person are so much broader and much more heavier given those expectations with AI. For a GM, for example, technology fluency may mean having to understand how automation or AI can improve planning, can improve throughput, quality, and even navigating margin without disrupting the business, right? When we talk about private equity as a whole, they want operators that can effectively adopt that technology, enhance and optimize, and that's the new tranche of individuals and professionals that we have now that need to have that level of edge and sharpness to them that they can bring in to their workplace. When we talk about a strategy role, it may mean understanding where autonomy, AI, electronics, software, digital sustainment are really changing that landscape. And each one of those segments are massive in of themselves. And then you can touch compliance, export controls, particularly in the aerospace and defense. The conversation becomes much more about data, governance, security, and customer trust. So when these roles come in, the title may look familiar, I think, but the profile underneath is really changing as a whole, right? And, and that's especially true in aerospace and defense because the market is also moving into a period of new investment, right? And a lot of greenfield work. So there's a lot of new programs, there's new platforms coming into market, there's new production requirements that are being held. There's new defense tech companies that are new entrants in the space. A new AI enabled workflows that are creating leadership needs that aren't always served by the old playbook at this point. So everything is adapting, everything is moving forward, everything is optimizing, and we're moving really quickly. Thus, the operator and the professional needs to move at that scale and that pace to keep up with that cadence and that rhythm. So the strongest leaders are usually the ones who can take that AI out of the abstract and really make it practical. I mean, in market, AI has only been around for a few years commercially, and those who've really adopted it and in practice and applied it to their work, they're seeing returns in output and at least functions into their day to day. But those that aren't, we're maybe seeing productivity gaps that might be nuanced, and it's really hard to scale. So for that, when we look at those strongest leaders, they can look at a business and understanding where productivity can improve, what workflows have to change, where human judgment still matters, and how to bring people through that change fully, right? And I think lastly, there's a talent development issue underneath this, and I alluded to this previously, is that if AI starts taking over some of the work junior people used to learn on, companies need to be really thoughtful about how they build judgment in the next generation. And that matters in engineering, it matters in manufacturing, it matters in professional services and corporate functions. So from where I sit, the conversation is really moving toward work design, talent design, and essentially leadership readiness at this point.
Awesome. And are you seeing any AI native mandates specifically from clients around go to market or GM roles, or is it still a little bit early for that in the life cycle of how people are thinking about having leaders with AI experience and expertise that they can bring to the table?
AI native specifically is where we're getting at the cusp. I think we're getting very, very close to starting to see that a lot more. In A&D, it's not as adopted fully. Uh, AI native is starting to get that trend, but given the compliance and regulation capacities that fall into A&D, uh, that still has to be navigated in a lot of rigorous means between, if you look at manufacturing specifically or export controls. Beyond that, AI is used on the lower levels, but to have an executive come in that's AI native at the forefront, it's going to be hard to have somebody that's already built that sharpness at that point in their career where they can take that to market and really call themselves AI native. You're going to see a lot of executives that managed a lot of programs throughout their careers and have done that for years and very, very well. And we're dealing with legacy structures where getting into that AI native is not quite there, but we're getting really close. And I think that's going to be the differentiator for some of these executives, is how well are they AI native in the next 2 to 3 years to be able to differentiate themselves from the competition. I don't want to go to the point to say that we're going to be making end decisions on a short list whether or not someone is AI native versus not. But I think if we're making future bets on whether this leader is going to start driving productivity growth more than another, I think it's going to start coming into the question.
Makes sense. And then, so taking a step back from AI for a second, just thinking about like layoffs in general, we've seen Microsoft announce like 7%. We've seen Meta, I think, target about 20% of its workforce. I've had the thesis for a long period of time, and I worked at Uber, I worked at Amazon myself, that most of the work as a software engineer, most of the workforce really isn't necessary for growth, let alone sustaining the existing businesses that they have in a lot of these cases. And they probably could get rid of like 60, 70% and maintain margins and probably still maintain a vast majority of their growth as well. Are you seeing any trends that are specific to aerospace and defense as an industry that would corroborate some of the things that we're seeing from a tech perspective as it relates to layoffs, or what does that layoff landscape look like?
It's a really good question, and I think it's nuanced and it's layered. When you look at, because we're going to segment two different phylums here. So we have the Metas and the Microsofts of the world, and I think it's important to be careful with the headline. I think it's easy to say AI is causing layoffs, but in reality, it's usually more layered, right? Companies are still investing heavily in AI. They're still hiring in areas they believe are kind of strategic, but at the same time, they're reducing roles in parts of the business where they see overlap, right? There's lower growth, there's lower margin, or the work can potentially be done differently. Microsoft's a great example, right? The stock's down quite significantly this year, but their latest cuts have reported to be about 4,800 roles relatively, and so including a major restructuring in Xbox, particularly in one of their major products. So the company has framed this as a broader business and efficiency reset, while they're still continuing to invest heavily in AI. So we're seeing this cost reduction, cost cutting, while this massive investment going on in AI. So I think that it's telling us something important, is that AI investment and layoffs can effectively happen at the same time. And when we talk about Meta is similar. Like, the company's been reshaping the organization around AI, around efficiency, and what it wants is the next version of the company to look like, right? Some of it, it's AI driven, some of it's cost discipline, but I think at the end of the day, it's probably some strategic reallocation, similar to what Microsoft is. Now, to answer your question regarding how that plays into aerospace and defense in terms of layoffs and cost cutting, when we look at aerospace and defense in the manufacturing world, similar to the technology and tech space, we're in a position where anyone that's not advancing fast enough or keeping up quickly enough in terms of Gen 3, Gen 4 technology that might be coming out, and some of their competitors, what we're seeing is Anduril is a great example. Anduril is a relatively new entrant to the space, a massive disruptor in aerospace and defense, and it hasn't been where aerospace and defense hasn't really had a competitor competing against the primes. And now we're seeing Anduril come up to bat, and it's doing so through means of technology advancement, through processes, through its rigorous efficiencies, that now it's competing against the primes that where before it'd be really hard for a new entrant to even get to that level. But now, because of technology, because of AI, we're getting that point where new entrants are now able to come into market and compete against the Goliaths. And that's fascinating to see. And I think we're going to see more of it. But in terms of layoffs, those that aren't competing and that aren't being efficient in market right now, it's going to be hurting. And they're going to be ups and downs a lot more, I think, for some of them that aren't creating those efficiencies earlier on during this time.
Makes sense. And so do you think that fully covers the scope of like defense tech versus traditional primes, and how AI, autonomy, software, and speed are changing the leadership that companies need, and perhaps which companies are leaders in their own like Gartner quadrants, if you will?
Yeah, can you reshape that question? Can we
I
reshape that
can.
one? Yeah.
So defense technology
Yeah.
and the landscape from a company perspective. There's new entrants like Anduril. There
Yeah.
are traditional primes,
Yeah.
and there's a variety of companies that the government's choosing to work with directly. Seems to
Yeah.
be a shifting horizon. We also see this with like drone boats that I believe are being provided, like in
Yeah.
the Strait of Hormuz right now,
Yeah.
uh, assisting with like a bunch of like recovery missions, for example. So
Yeah.
I'm curious how you're seeing the confluence of new entrants with new technology, could be inclusive of Anduril,
Yeah.
but there's others
Yeah.
in there as well, are maybe closing in on different parts of the defense market and beating the primes, and where the primes perhaps still have competitive edges, and where maybe they're lagging and trying to catch up.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's a good one. Okay. Let's get. Yeah. Well, I mean, we can still reuse the question when you asked it, right? That's probably the.
Or I can ask it a different way. If you want me to ask it a certain way, maybe I'm misasking it
No.
compared to
No.
what
No.
you
No. I think
have
that
written.
was that way was good. Let's try it again. Yeah. Ask it that way. I think I can wrap my head around that one. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So defense tech, we're going to compare the traditional primes versus the new incumbents.
Yeah.
Where do you think the opportunities are
Mhm.
for the incumbents that are getting disrupted, these primes?
Mhm.
versus the Andurils and some of these other new entrants that have better technology, better grasps on AI? How do you recover? How do you catch up
Mhm.
as an incumbent in a scenario like this?
I think this is probably one of the biggest shifts in the defense market right now. I think for a long time, the traditional primes had the clearest advantage because they had the scale, they had the customer trust historically, they had the program history, they already had the contracting infrastructure, they've put in place compliance, and then really the ability to manage large, complex projects. So they were always, whether from the government, the go-to to really have that trust in that infrastructure. So those advantages were always key to them. In defense specifically, you can't really replace decades of customer trust and program execution overnight. And that's been built, and we're talking about multiple decades throughout. But where we're seeing it and where it's interesting is that the landscape is now clearly changing, where the primes are having to sharpen up. And so, like I said, you have companies like Anduril, you have companies like Palantir, you have companies like Shield AI, you have Saronic, Helsing is another one. Quantum systems would be another one. And those, and we have many others that are coming in. And what they're doing is that they're pushing into areas where we talked about speed, we talked about software, autonomy, we talked about data, lower cost production obviously is huge. So that tends to matter more than what the primes did historically. So when we think of the primes have really done so well and have operated in a legacy fashion. But from a customer base, if the new entrants are able to move quicker and more efficiently and bring new technology at the forefront, that's going to be competitive. And so the new technologies are changing the shape of the competition, right? It's not just aircraft, it's not just ships, it's not vehicles, and traditional platforms. It's the autonomous systems, right? It's drone swarms, it's counter UAS, it's unmanned surface vessels, it's undersea systems, AI enabled ISR. You got battlefield software, edge autonomy. So the digital command and control, the cheaper attributable systems that can really be produced and upgraded a lot faster than it ever has been in the past. And so Ukraine is a good one where it has really accelerated the conversation because it showed how quickly drones, autonomy, electronic warfare, ISR software, all of that, the Indo-Pacific really adds another layer because scale, the distance, the maritime autonomy, all become really important. So the competitive edge is really shifting. It's shifting quickly, and so I don't think the question is anymore of who can build the biggest platform. I think we're at a point where it's also who can sense faster, who can decide faster, who can produce faster, update faster, and really integrate across systems faster. So that's where companies, when I mentioned like Anduril, have been so interesting, right? Their models is much more software defined, it's product oriented, and Lattice, for example, is another great example. It's is positioned as an autonomy and command and control platform that really can integrate sensors, effectors. It has autonomous systems, and that is a very different posture from a traditional program by program defense model. And you can see the same trends in unmanned maritime. The U.S. Navy has been moving forward with medium unmanned surface vehicle testing. Companies like Saronic, Sail Drone, Lados, and a few others are all part of kind of that broader push. So the fact that drone boats, for example, and unmanned surface vessels are now part of the mainstream naval planning tells you that how much the horizon is effectively shifting all the way through. I'm going to pause there. I'm going to sneeze.
All
Okay.
good.
um,
Cool.
yeah.
So
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
so tons of things that are shifting up the scene as it relates to advanced
Well, I think I
both.
still need to finish up on because I need to talk about primes. I think I still need to
Okay,
talk
go ahead.
primes because I need to level those guys up because I can't just say that they're going to be facing. So I think at the same time, the primes are not standing still. The primes are still investing. They're partnering. They're acquiring significantly. They're acquiring and partnering with some of these new entrants, and so they're trying to bring the new technologies into their platforms, right? When we think of Lockheed Martin's move from where they acquired Ultra Maritime very recently, is a really good example of prime's positioning around undersea and naval defense technologies. Thales, also another good, where they move around Exhale, also points to growing interest in autonomous and subsea systems. So the primes really understand that the market is moving, and they are there. So I don't want to necessarily just frame this as startups are replacing the primes. I really want to frame this as the ecosystem as a whole is becoming just a lot more competitive and a lot more fluid. And when we talk about those new entrants, they're essentially forcing speed. They're forcing product thinking, software-led models for the primes that they still need to compete against that. And it's essentially enabling the primes to move quicker and grow in areas that they hadn't, because now they have this competition that they have to push up against. And which is why we always love competition in market, because it always creates a really competitive new landscape, new technology, new area for growth. And so when we look at the primes that can still bring the scale, the customer trust, the integration capabilities, the classified program experience, increasingly, I think the winners may be the companies that can combine both, right? They can combine that speed, they can combine the software intensity of defense tech with discipline, with reliability and customer trust and traditional defense. So from a search perspective, in closing this, and from a leadership perspective as well, it's changing the executive profile. So a leader in this market has to really understand more than just one world at this point. If they're coming from a prime, they need to show that they can move with that urgency and work across software autonomy and emerging technologies. If they're coming from a defense technology company, they need to show that they can scale and build process and win government trust and execute reliably. So that's where a lot of the searches are getting that interest. I think the question isn't just who has the most impressive background at this point. It's the question is now whose experience transfers into the environment that they're entering. And the companies that will win in this next phase are going to be the ones that can move quickly, that can build that trust, that can integrate that technology and effectively deliver at scale.
Very cool. So program experience, maturity, everything else that we'd expect with a reliable large prime with technology is going to be the winner for winning new contracts and probably retaining existing
Mhm.
contracts as well. I'm I'm curious, what types of jobs are you seeing? What types of titles are you seeing that are in highest demand right now, either from primes or from some of these rising star companies that are winning contracts as well directly?
Mm. Okay, so I'm gonna pause. So we're talking about specific new titles that we're seeing due to to AI. Is that what we're going?
Or it could be not AI specific at all. I mean, likely, I
Okay.
imagine that's going to be part of it, but
Okay.
could just be the highest in demand roles right now. Could be GM roles, could be go to market roles, could be
Okay.
whatever that you're seeing in or out of AI.
Okay. Yeah. Um, okay. Yeah. I think that's a good question. Okay. So I think, yeah. All right. You want to? I think we're pretty good. That was well asked. So I think I'll just hop in at this point.
Sounds great.
Fair.
Go for it.
Okay. I think no. I appreciate that, JC. I think no, I appreciate that question, JC. I think I'd answer it into two categories, and I think the first one is the AI and technology adjacent category. In A&D, that it doesn't always mean a company's hiring a pure head of AI. We're not seeing a ton of that yet. But sometimes they are. But more often, the demand is showing up where inside roles tied to, which I alluded to, tied to autonomy, tied to data, software, cybersecurity, and maybe even more product. Autonomy leadership is really becoming that major area. So someone that might be leading autonomous systems, that's there, that for unmanned platforms, for edge autonomy, or even AI-enabled mission systems. So the title may vary, but the business need is usually pretty clear. So it's usually coming from a company that needs a leader who can take autonomy from concept into something that can actually be tested, integrated, produced, and trusted by the customer. So when we look at cyber and AI governance are also becoming more important at this point. So within A&D companies, as A&D companies use more connected systems, kind of sensitive data, AI tools, software-enabled platforms, we're finding that the risk profiles are changing significantly. So we're seeing a lot more demand for leaders who can understand the cyber piece, the data piece, the governance piece, who can model that risk, who can understand the export controls, and really the customer trust. And so when we talk about A&D, we're not at a point where we're just looking at corporate risk anymore. We're getting much more closely tied to individuals that can, one, understand that risk, but also understand the mission and the customer desires at the end of the point. So when we talk about like a VP RF, for example, for radio frequency, or someone that's navigating new product. So when they're doing new product, they're thinking about how to put this product into market, but then they're thinking about how it's going to affect mission in field, or they're going to see how the customer perceives it. And so from an engineering perspective, from a customer perspective, and a mission perspective, it's very nuanced. And so they have to keep thinking about all these pieces as they go to market with this new product or existing product where they're enhancing it. And so that leads into the digital manufacturing and smart factory leadership, which is the other area for if a company is standing up a new production capacity, or they're modernizing an existing facility, which we're seeing a lot of right now. There's a lot of new greenfield projects and new greenfield facilities that are going up. They need leaders who can understand how that data, that automation, the robotics, the quality systems, and of course AI can actually improve the operations. So that's especially important in greenfield environments, because you have a chance to build the operating model correctly from the beginning. And I'd say the second category is the broader A&D leadership demand. That's not just purely AI, but it's really being shaped by the same market forces. When we talk about a GM and a P&L leader, those are both incredibly and extremely important. With defense demand increasing, the issue for many companies is execution. Can this leader convert demand into delivery? Can they manage program performance, production, quality, customer expectation? Can they even manage margin? And so that's where the strong GM becomes very, very valuable. Operations, manufacturing, supply chain, quality leaders are also in really, really high demand. So the market has a capacity problem as much as a demand opportunity problem. So if you cannot produce, qualify, deliver, the backlogs right now aren't turning it into value. So the leaders who can really create that visibility, who can remove any kind of bottlenecks, who can navigate and strengthen supplier performance and relationships, who can improve that quality, are going to be very, very important moving forward. So program leadership is probably another big one, right? In A&D specifically, programs are where strategy is really, it's the intersection of where strategy becomes real on the program front. A strong program leader has to manage the customer, they have to manage the technical teams, they have to manage the scheduling, the cost, the risk, the quality, the internal alignment. And with a new platform specifically, or unmanned systems, or AI-enabled capabilities, program leadership is becoming even more critical. And to find somebody who can navigate those at scale and continue growing at scale are becoming fewer and farther apart in between those, because that talent, that skill set to have done that and to have done that effectively is there's not many in market, and we're going to see that continue to change. But we might see some new talent come in that are going to be able to take up that challenge and actually and come in and really hit it out of the park. Outside of that, there's also strategy. When we think of M&A and corporate development, there's a lot of companies that are trying to understand where the market's going. And so when we think of defense tech, autonomy, when we think of space, when we think of RF, sensors, electronics, counter UAS, unmanned maritime, strategy and M&A leaders who really can understand the A&D landscape can essentially assess capability gaps. They are becoming incredibly more valuable. And we're seeing this across the board. So the new titles that we're probably seeing more of, or at least the new language around titles, are things of head of autonomy. So we're seeing a lot of that. Autonomy, we're going to see a lot more of. We're seeing VP of AI and data. We're seeing chief digital officers. We're seeing more of VP digital manufacturing. We're seeing more of head of mission systems, VP software defined systems, VP capture, which has been around for a while, but now we're seeing more within the technology front. VP defense technology, chief growth officers are now in high demand. And so leaders are now tied to the unmanned systems or counter UAS. But I'd be careful not to get caught up too much in titles. The titles can change really quickly, and the real demand for the leaders who can operate and overlap between that technology, that mission, the customer trust, and that execution, that's where they're going to be the most valuable.
Makes sense. Great. So lots of new titles that are coming up. Some of these are unique to A&D, some are not. We see AI titles in a variety of categories. Do you have any other thoughts, just more broadly, about perhaps A&D's recruiting landscape? Could be categories such as how A&D can attract leaders from tech more broadly, or software, or autonomy, or manufacturing, commercial aerospace, whatever it happens to be, that are maybe intersecting with or not intersecting with AI as much.
Yeah, and that's an excellent question. I think I'd frame it in a few lenses. The recruiting angle is actually probably one of our more important ones to touch on, because that's recruiting, and talent is always the number one problem for any growing company that wants to be able to innovate and effectively grow. So I think the recruiting landscape in A&D is becoming much more open than it used to be. Historically, a lot of companies in the space wanted direct A&D experience. And that still matters today, especially for roles close to government customers, to classified work, to export controls, to quality. Program execution is also key. But we're finding that the market is effectively changing, because the capability needs are also changing. So as AI, autonomy, software, digital manufacturing, A&D companies are really looking at a wider talent pool at this point. They're really pulling from defense tech. They're pulling from commercial aerospace, software, even robotics, advanced manufacturing, since that's almost ubiquitous across the space. Electronics, automotive is also a piece. Energy still stays sometimes relevant from that exposure, but it's really other mission critical industrial environments. So we can see this in the broader markets too. Reuters was recently covered how defense startups are borrowing parts, methods, production ideas from automotive, from fracking even, and pharma manufacturing to really speed weapons output. So that's been fascinating to see, because now we're looking at other industries as a whole, and we're utilizing their methodologies or their processes to bring into the defense space to enable greater speed of production. And for us, I think that's a relatively useful signal. It's showing the industry is not just recruiting differently, it's learning from the industrial ecosystem. And so from a recruiting perspective, that's creating a much more interesting assessment problem. A leader from commercial aerospace may bring strong experience around safety. They might have strong experience around certifications, complex manufacturing. They understand, obviously, the customer expectation. That can translate well into certain A&D environments, especially in aviation, especially in MRO, in systems, components. But a leader from tech, for example, or software may bring a little bit different angle in terms of speed, in terms of product thinking specifically, to understanding the data fluency, and they might have a different way about building teams. And I think that that's very valuable in autonomy, in software defined systems where mission platforms, AI enabled, ISR, cyber, or any kind of digital sustainment. So if we even go beyond and start thinking about the automotive industry, a leader from automotive or advanced manufacturing may bring experience in high rate production. They come in from automation, lean systems, robotics. They have a lot of supplier development and cost discipline. And that can be really relevant as A&D companies try to increase production capability, try to increase production capacity and stand up new programs. But the crossover has to be really thought out by the hiring authorities for this talent. There's often a mistake, and the mistake is assuming that because someone is impressive in one market, that they will automatically work in A&D. A&D has a very different customer environment. The sales cycles are tremendously longer. The trust is often matters more. Export controls are huge. Security, quality, reliability, and in many cases, the consequences of failure are significantly higher. So when we assess crossover talent, the question is really about transferability. Can this person bring new capabilities into the business while respecting the operating realities? Can they build that credibility with the technical teams? Can they work with government or regulated customers? Can they move quickly without kind of creating that risk? And so the other interesting pieces is employer brand to those questions. In defense tech companies, for example, they have a much more aggressive way in how they recruit. Anduril is a great example. They've built a really strong talent brand that appeals to a lot of people who want that mission, the speed, the ownership, a bit of the harder operating environment. Their don't work for Anduril campaign is also interesting because it's essentially it filters for people who are drawn to that intensity rather than traditional tech perks. And you see that across the board. You see that in their comp models. You see that in how it all plays across the industry as a whole, is that we're seeing a drive for more entrepreneurial or intrapreneurial talent that want to take that head on. And so what that matters is because A&D companies are not only competing with each other. I'm going to rephrase that. So that matters because A&D companies are not only competing with each other anymore. They're competing with tech. They're now competing with AI companies. They're competing with software platforms, advanced manufacturing companies, energy companies, as I said. So the companies that win talent will be the ones that can tell a better story. And that's where the marketing folks will come into play. And they have to really explain the mission clearly. They have to show that the work matters. They have to give people strong ownership. They have to move faster in hiring, which is a huge point in recruitment. Any standstill or slow-moving process internally, if you're meeting 4, 5, 6, 7 stakeholders internally, that process can already be 2 to 3, 4 months. But that talent's not going to be in the market for long. And if they're even considering making a move with one company, you can rest assured that there's probably 2 or 3 others that are probably pulling their ear. And if you're not the fastest to get to offer stage and you're really taking your time, you're losing a lot of potential to gain that talent. So they have to be honest about how that operating environment is going to look like, how that process is going to look like when hiring, because it's going to be detrimental if they're not quick enough to move with the talent in place. And I think lastly, it's especially true for greenfield work. if you're building a new facility, a new platform, a new autonomy business, a new AI enabled product line, it can be really, really attractive to talent. People like building. They like joining something.
Bless you.
Thank you. Take that back up to the top. I think people really like building. They like joining something where the playbook is not already fully written. There's a bit of a blank page in front of them. But the company essentially has to be really clear about the mandate. They have to be clear about the resourcing. They have to be clear about the decision rights and what success actually looks like. Because when we first open the door to a candidate that looks at a new role and a relatively new company and new entrants, the candidate has to de-risk that platform. They have to de-risk that decision making for that. How much risk are they taking from moving from their previous platform to this platform? What are the upsides? What are the risks? How much opportunity will they have to grow this, to have that autonomy in play? And it's, I think, when we get to the end stage, those that will have meaningfully more ability to provide resourcing and growth opportunities for this talent, we're going to probably see them win a lot more of the talent in market. So my view is that A&D recruiting is becoming more competitive. It's more cross-sector. It's much more brand driven at this point. So the companies that stay too narrow, they may miss really strong talent. And the companies that go too broad without enough discipline assessment may make those bad hires. So the sweet spot, I think, is really widening the aperture while being very disciplined about what's actually transferring.
Got it. Well, very broad, but also fairly depth analysis of talent moves and trends that we're seeing across aerospace, defense, and AI. I think that's about our time for today. Max, do you have any other closing comments you'd like to have before we sign off from our podcast episode for today?
I think closing comments for me at this point, I think the main takeaway for us is that AI, defense tech, and the current geopolitical environments are all changing the leadership equation in A&D. And the companies that will win will not just be the ones with the best technology. They will be the ones that can turn technology into execution. They'll be the ones that have better production, that have better quality, that have better decision making. And from a talent perspective, I think that means that the leadership profile is clearly evolving. And A&D companies still need people who understand the customers, who understand the mission, who understands the regulatory environment, and the discipline to deliver. But they also need leaders who can bring in the new thinking from software, from autonomy, from AI, advanced manufacturing, and defense tech without losing the operating rigor this industry requires. So for boards, CEOs, and investors, I think the question is becoming very practical. Do we have the leaders who can bridge those worlds? Can they move fast, build trust, and manage risk? And can they actually deliver? That is where I think the next wave of value in A&D will be created.
Awesome. Love to hear it. Well, there you have it, everyone. AI, geopolitics, and the aerospace and defense industry are all intersecting in transforming the needs that we have for leaders across the board. We'll have Max on here again for the AI Builders podcast, brought to you by Christian Timbers at another date, not in the too distant future. But thanks for listening in today, and we'll see you next time. Bye. Okay.